Let's talk about a feeling that so many of us have, but we don't really understand. It's that feeling of being completely wiped out, even on days when you feel like you've barely done a thing. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Maybe you had a pretty quiet day, just sat at your desk or had one single video call. But by the end of it, you feel like you've run a marathon. You're just done. And you can't for the life of you figure out why. And what's the first thing we usually do? We blame ourselves. We call it laziness or say we're just not motivated. But what if that exhaustion isn't a character flaw at all? What if it's actually a clue about how your brain is wired? Well, the science tells a completely different story. So, let's break down what's really happening when you feel this way. Because this is a very specific kind of tired, the kind that a quick nap just doesn't seem to fix. Here's the key thing to get. This isn't physical fatigue. Your muscles aren't tired, your brain is. It's kind of like a computer that has way too many apps running in the background. Psychologists actually have a couple of names for this. They call it a social hangover or sensory overload. Let's dig into that first idea, the social hangover. This all comes down to having what you might call a socially sensitive brain. High social sensitivity is really just a way of saying your brain is working a lot harder during any kind of social interaction. It's not just hearing the words someone says, it's analyzing all the little subtle bits of data that come along with them. And that whole process, it burns a ton of energy. And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the difference here. An average brain in a conversation, it's mostly just focused on the words being spoken. But a socially sensitive brain, well, it's doing that, plus it's analyzing the tone of voice, reading tiny micro-expressions on someone's face, sensing the emotional vibe, and trying to figure out the subtext. It's a massive amount of data to process all at once. It's this constant background analysis that's so draining. You're not just listening, you're noticing the tiny hesitation in someone's voice, that quick flicker of an eye, the general feeling in the room that nobody's actually talking about. Your brain is basically running like a high-powered social supercomputer. And all that extra work, it has a very real cost. Some studies suggest that a socially sensitive brain can burn up to 30% more glucose, that's the brain's main fuel, during these kinds of interactions compared to an average brain. This chart really drives the point home. Just take a simple 1-hour meeting. For one person, it's a moderate use of their mental energy. But for someone with a socially sensitive brain, that exact same meeting is a high-energy event, leaving them feeling way more depleted afterward. But you know, it's not just about people. So let's move on to the second big reason you might feel this way, sensory overload. This is all about the brain that seems to notice and hear, well, everything. Think about it for a second. Are you the person who always notices the low hum of the refrigerator, or the ticking of a clock from across the room, or even the sound of someone chewing a few tables away? If that sounds like you, then this next part is going to make a lot of sense. There's a scientific term for this. It's called low latent inhibition. The easiest way to think about it is this. Most brains have a built-in filter that automatically tunes out irrelevant background noise. But a brain with low latent inhibition has a much weaker filter. It treats almost every sound, every sight, every piece of information as potentially important and needing to be processed. This table breaks it down perfectly. For most people, a ticking clock just fades into the background. For a hyperconnected brain, it's a constant rhythmic piece of data. A distant siren is just irrelevant noise to one person, but for the other, it's a potential alert that has to be processed and categorized. This never-ending stream of unfiltered information is absolutely exhausting. So the big takeaway here is that if you find yourself getting easily overwhelmed in noisy places, your brain isn't being difficult or too sensitive. It's actually working overtime, doing its best to make sense of a massive flood of information that most other brains just ignore. Okay, so understanding all of this is the first step. But the next, and maybe more important step, is learning how to manage your energy. So let's look at some really practical ways you can recharge and prevent this kind of overload from happening in the first place. There are really 4 key strategies that can make a huge difference. First, actually schedule do-nothing time into your calendar to let your brain reset. Second, create a personal low-stimulus space. Third, use tools like noise-canceling headphones. And fourth, be more selective about the social events you go to. You really don't have to say yes to everything. And let's just zoom in on that low-stimulus space idea. It doesn't have to be a whole room. It can just be a corner of your apartment with dim lighting, maybe a white noise machine, and a strict no screens, no notifications rule. The whole point is to give your brain a place where it doesn't have to process anything new for a while. All right, and this last part, this might be the most important piece of the entire puzzle. We need to completely reframe how we think about these traits. This isn't a weakness that you need to fix, it's actually a different kind of strength.
I love this quote because it just hits the nail on the head. Your brain isn't broken. It's not flawed. It's just wired for a high-definition experience of the world, one that's filled with a richness and detail that a lot of people miss.
And here's the best part. That same wiring comes with some incredible upsides. The same sensitivity that makes a crowded party so draining is also what fuels deep empathy, creativity, and the ability to see connections that other people just don't. You notice more, which means you often understand more. So the real question to leave you with is this. It's time to stop seeing this exhaustion as a limit. See it as a guide instead. It's your brain telling you exactly what it needs: more quiet, less noise, more intentional rest. So how can you start listening to those signals and begin to structure your life to work with your brain instead of against it?